Hey there, YouTube. Welcome back. This is the Allegheny Northern in N scale, and today we are going to be talking about speed matching. It is the next step in our DCC basics training course. And so, what speed matching is doing is we're taking locomotives that we want to run together in a consist, and we are going to make them perform similarly enough that they don't fight each other. And so, if you are somebody who is a DC only guy, this article, this video is useless to you because you can't speed match in DC only. But if you are in DCC, this is an important step for you, and you are going to want to know how to do this because it will open up a whole new avenue for you, especially if you're interested in running distributed power or helper unit operations. So stick around, let me show you how I do it. It's not as bad as it sounds in some ways, and in other ways it's worse than it sounds. So let's get into it. Okay, so the first step you're going to do in speed matching is you're going to select the locomotives you want to match speeds. And in this case, we've got a scale trains and an Arnold model, and I know that they are geared very differently, and I know that they are equipped very differently. So the 6510 on the right, that has a standard Digitrax non-sound decoder, nothing fancy, just something basic to get it on the tracks and in DCC. The scale trains, it has the whole kit and caboodle. It has the ESU V5 loc sound decoder, so it's got all the bells and whistles that you would expect from scale trains. So, two very different decoders, and they are going to function very, very differently. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I am going to set a lead locomotive. In my case, I want the fully sound equipped locomotive to have the lead. Needs to. And what we're going to do here is we are going to make a 3-unit consist. So it's easier if you do this only at 2 at a time than trying to match all 3. And it helps a whole heck of a lot if you've got 2 tracks parallel that you can run them on. If you don't, you can do it with a single track. It's just easier if you have a double main line. So what we're going to do here is we are going to match these 2, and then once we get these 2 close enough, we're going to match the third one to the pair. First thing we're going to do is we are going to change the address so that we have one single address. The reason I do this is because it is just easier when speed matching to have them all respond to the same address. That means you are only dealing with one throttle when you're making all of your adjustments. Otherwise, you have to have 2 throttles. You have to set them the same. There's going to be acceleration comes into a play. It's just easier to have it set at one address. So I picked 6005 as the lead address because the unit on the left is going to be my lead unit when I get this thing set and ready to go. Okay, well, how did I pick that as my lead unit? Well, we have an Arnold unit on the right, and we have a scale trains on the left. The scale trains on the left is equipped with the ESU loc sound V5 decoder, so it has, quite frankly, all the bells and whistles to it. So I want it to lead the train because it is going to have the flashing ditch lights and all the beautiful functions that we know and love from scale trains, and we want to see on our railroad. All of the trailing locomotives, which will be in the consist right before the cars, it does not need to have all those bells and whistles because in real life, those features would be turned off in a consisted locomotive. You're only going to hear from the lead locomotive. What I am going to do is after we do speed match, I will return the addresses to their own number. So all of the decoders will read per the locomotive road number, but that way I can build the consist in the command center and not have it relied on as the same address. The reason I may do this is because when I am switching with the consist, there may be a reason why I would need to leave one or more of the locomotives that are in the consist on the train or separate to the train, or I may be running distributed power or help service with those with that consist, and in which case those locomotives may be in different parts of the train, and there may be a condition where I want to separate the operation of those locomotives and take control of one independently. So it is very important that if you plan on doing that, or you have more complex operations on your railroad, that you consider that before you get too far into it, and remember to return the address to its rightful home, I guess. Okay, for those of you who do not remember how to address your locomotives, I'm going to take you over to the panel right now and show you how to do that. Okay, so getting with the basics here, I am in my at my command station here. I'm going to hit the functions key, and where I have my programmer, I'm going to go to a quick program setup, and I am going to read the locomotive that is on there. Even though we're not doing anything with that locomotive, I just want to show you how easy it is. So we're going to do a CV quick read, and all that's doing is it is reaching out to the program track and it is trying to read the information contained on the decoder for the locomotive that is there. So the information you're seeing here is all of the information that is on that decoder. If I was going to consist this locomotive, I've already got the number 2 long address selected. I would simply hit the data key and then change the number to the number of the locomotive that I want it to match, and then I would hit write, and that information would write to the decoder. This is going to vary from system to system, so whatever system you have and however you rate your decoders, that's how you would do this. Digitrax with the DCS52 makes it very easy. It's one of the things that I love most about it, is that it gives you this quick setup, and you don't have to go through all of the individual CVs to program that information in. Some of the other systems probably have something similar, and if they don't, I'm sorry for you. You've got to do a DCC calculator to come up with your CVs. But anyway, that's how you would do it. Let's go back over to the layout. Okay, so I am bringing you to a wide view here of our locomotives, and I'm going to throw my reverser into forward, so you will see that the headlights come on both locomotives, telling me that I am ready to rock and roll. Now, you can, if you want to, shut the automatic startup and sound functions off on your scale trains locomotive for the time being. That's up to you. I'm not going to do it because the sounds that you're going to hear aren't going to matter. If you have 2 sound equipped locomotives, one of which you may be taking on and off the layout, I do recommend that you temporarily turn off all the sound features. It just makes life easier. But in this case, because I've got 2 locomotives that are not under the same decoder and are not both sound equipped, I am not going to be taking the scale trains locomotive off of the layout at all, because I am going to make all of the other locomotives match that scale trains, because that is going to be my lead locomotive, so that is the performance that I want. Okay, we are going to be dealing with a handful of variables, and that is it. So on your CV list, we are going to be dealing with CVs 2, 6, 5, 3, and 4. Okay, so as you recall from the DCC basics video last week, control variable 2 is your starting voltage, control variable 6 is your mid-range voltage, and control variable 5 is your top range voltage. And yes, I do realize the 6 and the 5 are flipped. That is just the way it is. I'm sure there's a reason for it. Don't know what it is. Not important. Feel free to Google that if you need to. Okay, and I do apologize for that sound. The big boy is on the layout, and it was doing its little sting thing over there, so sorry about that. Anyway, okay, now we are introducing 2 new variables that we did not talk about, I don't believe, last week, and that is variables 3 and 4. 3 is your acceleration, and 4 is your deceleration. So this will add drift to your locomotives, or it will add delay in starting. As I've mentioned previously, because we've got a locomotive with loc sound V5 and it's got certain features in the decoder that are linked to how that locomotive runs with the sound file, I am not going to be able to get a perfect match with the Digitrax. It's just not going to happen. It's an older decoder, it's not as advanced, and the ESU decoder is going to win. So we are actually going to have to trick the Digitrax decoder to work in this case. I'm going to show you how to do it. So first, let's see how far off we are. Because I've had both of these locomotives for a while, I think we are going to be way far off. And in speed matching, you've got to remember that there is always a way to speed a locomotive up, but there's not always a way to slow it down at a certain point. And there are ranges to that, so that comes with a little asterisk next to it because there are caveats. But if you have a locomotive that starts very, very slow, you can usually speed it up by adjusting CV2. And if you've got a locomotive that goes flying, it's a little hard to slow down because if it's not getting an extra voltage, it's gonna go flying out of control. And so when we start these two locomotives, we're gonna go in reverse, and you're gonna notice that my Arnold goes flying down the tracks long before my scale trains even starts. So if I were to put these two locomotives right now into a pairing, there is absolutely no way they would run together because the Arnold tears off. We're at about 25% throttle right now, and you'll notice that when I stop them, the Arnold damn near just stops and the scale trains coast to a stop. So you can see that these two locomotives are very, very, very far apart. Now comes the fun part where we start adjusting the variables. Okay, so one thing to consider here is that this is all trial and error. So I don't actually know what the value of these CVs are going to be. And I'm going to just start somewhere. And as I get closer to the results that I want, I'm going to continue to make adjustments within a fine range. So you'll notice that when I start making adjustments to the CVs, I'll start by making large adjustments, 15 or 20 intervals. And then I'm going to start getting down to, okay, I'm going to change that CV by 5. I'm going to change that CV by 2 and really fine tune it. So that's what we're going to do here. Now remember, that slow start and that crawl that we're getting is what we want to match the scale trains. And it's going to be a little bit challenging. I'm going to show you how we do it. Okay, so I know that my end variable or CV data is going to be nowhere near 255 because at the current speed curve, which is way too fast, that means that 255 is probably way too high. So we are going to limit where the decoder can go. So basically we're going to limit how much power the locomotive is going to receive from the track. So at a certain point, the decoder will say, that's it, you're not going any faster. That's what we're going to set here. So we want to read this back here. We want to take this and we want to change the data to something less than 255. So I'm going to take this all the way down to 200. And just a matter of changing that CV and then writing it. Okay, we're not going to put it on the track because I do know that right now we also need to change our midpoint. Now, all we're doing is we are moving the curve down, right? So we are going to be changing the distance between the midpoint, the end point, and the beginning point. And so we're going to adjust the curve. And for those of you who are like, what in the hell did he just say? I will show you what's going to happen. So I know that our midpoint is 128 because that's where we set it at. And I know that it's going way, way, way too fast. So here's what you need to think about. Between your 2 points, so between 2 and 5 and then 5 and 6, the closer those numbers are together, the slower that locomotive is going to accelerate, okay? Because it doesn't have very far to get from, say, 0 to 50 as it would if it had to go 0 to 100. It's going to go a lot faster from the 0 to 100 because it's got to go faster before it reaches its midpoint. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring that midpoint in a lot to try and slow the locomotive down. So right now I know that the midpoint, CV6, is 128. I'm going to bring it down to 80. Okay, so the program will tell you, or the system will tell you that it's written okay. That means that value is plugged in there. Now, I know this is not enough yet. I know that we have a starting issue, that the scale trains is going through its motions. It is revving up the engine. It is releasing the air brakes, all things that this Digitrax decoder is not going to do. So let's not even screw around with that. Let's go into CV number 3. Let's go ahead and read the data. It's going to be 0. There it is. So that means there is no delay. As soon as I am sending a command from the throttle to the decoder, it is immediately reacting to that. Well, we are going to add some time because we do not want it to immediately react. And let's just start off. We're going to add a value of 10. That is a very long delay. We're going to write that in. And then we are also, while we're doing that, we know that the scale train's locomotive is going to coast when it stops. So we are going to go in and we're going to take CV4, which is your deceleration. We're going to take the data and we're also going to make it 10. And we're going to go ahead and write that. Now, those are fairly drastic changes from what you've already seen on the locomotive. So I want to show you how that reacts, even though I have a good feeling we're not in the right ballpark yet. But I want you to see this and how it's going to change the operation of the decoder. Now, also don't forget, we've gone from a CV of 2, so that CV2 is now 1, and our CV6 is now 80. So it's going to go a little bit slower because it's not going to 128, right? So it's not going to speed up as fast. But then we're also still going from 80 to 200. So that means after the locomotive reaches the midpoint of its throttle, it's going to start accelerating very, very, very quickly to get to that 200. And we are not going to want it to do that. So we are eventually going to knock that down again. But let me show you the reactions because I feel like you seeing it makes a lot more sense than these numbers. And these numbers are simply representing changes in the voltage that we're making. And you're going, okay, well, how are you figuring this out? And once again, it's not that I am in some way a genius in DCC. No, far from it. But I have this little cheat book that I got from Digitrax, and it tells me the range of the various CVs. And once again, this is starting, so I understand where my ranges are. So that's how I know that I can go from 0 to 255 on my speed curve. And then, in acceleration, once again, so here's my CVs 3 and 4. I know the default value is 0, which we saw, and I know I can go as high as 31. And so that is a reference of current and how much current is going to the motor and when or the delay. And if you have one of these little handy-dandy books, this is simply a decoder book. It gives you all the answers as far as what it is and what you're changing. So if you want to learn a little bit more, I don't want to go into all of that now. You just got to kind of stick with me here. Okay, so what did we end up doing to our locomotive? And let's find out. And you can see that we are still taking off. But you did notice that it's not taking off nearly as fast, right? Like that. Now that Scale Trains is running, it kind of caught up to it, right? So they're keeping an equal distance. So it is still that initial start that is the problem, right? We're still having that issue. And now you can see going forward, the Digitrax decoder is still a little bit faster, so we need to slow that down a lot. But the stopping was almost perfect. Almost perfect. So we're getting closer. Now, for those of you who have seen other folks do speed matching videos and they have those little doodads that measure the scale miles per hour of the locomotive, if you have one of those, absolutely use it. It will probably help you a little bit. But you're still doing the same thing that I'm doing here, and that is you're eyeballing the speed, right? I know that I'm never going to get these two decoders to line up perfectly because they don't have the same functionality. Can't do it. But I can get close, and so I'm eyeballing it anyway, and that's kind of sort of the game. You're just going to keep adjusting those numbers until you get reasonably close. And So that I don't dash your hopes. If you are going to do a complex operation, which I would say a complex operation for multiple units is mid-train helpers or DPUs, end-train DPUs, or helper service that is going to connect and disconnect from a train at a certain point. Those are a little bit more difficult to speed match, right? And so I would not recommend trying to match two different decoders that are this vastly different. Like if you had two locomotives that both had a low sound V5 decoder in it, you could get them so close that you could absolutely do that. This train is not ever going to be able to have that capability because I cannot get the decoders and the locomotives to line up. So you're not going to see me put one of these locomotives as a mid-train helper. It's just not going to happen because I'm not going to be able to line them up enough. And even if I have a train that is complete with body mount couplers all the way around and nice free rolling micro trains, trucks, it's just not going to be enough. And at some point in time, you're going to get a speed fluctuation that is going to separate your train. It's either going to push too hard or pull too hard. You're going to string line or you're going to derail. It's just not going to work out very well. So I am just going to make that disclaimer that there are certain things that you're not going to be able to do depending on the equipment that you have. Now, if you want to match a non-sound locomotive with a sound locomotive like we're doing here, there is a ESU decoder. It is the Loc Pilot that has all of those functionalities that the ESU Loc Sound decoder does have, and you can get them to play nice together. You do pay a little bit more for that decoder as opposed to the little cheapy drop-in Digitrax, but you get that functionality. And then if you have their programmer, then you can get in there and you can mess with all the settings and you can make these things run a little bit smoother. So this is for those of you who are sort of redneck engineering it a little bit. Gives you sort of the real man approach to trying to make this work as opposed to, the I have everything and I'm all pro. So, okay, we are going to make a few minor adjustments and see if we can't get these locomotives a little bit closer. Okay, because I know we were almost dead on with our deceleration, I am just going to change that to 12, and I'm going to write that. We're going to give that one a shot. Let's go back to our CV number 3, and our CV data, which I do believe was 10. And yes, it was. And you still saw that this thing went flying out of control. So we are going to kick this up. We have a max of 31. We're going to give it 25. Now, this is where you run into a problem. So this is not saying that your startup command is going to be delayed. It is saying every command that the locomotive receives is going to be delayed. So if you start running up through your throttle, it is going to have the same delay every step of the way. So this locomotive is going to lag behind the other locomotive, basically. And I'm already thinking in my head that this 25 is going to be way too much, but let's give it a shot. Now, the other thing that we need to do is we need to go back and we need to look at our midpoint. And I know we set that at 80, and you got to put the right CV in there, otherwise you're not going to look at the right data. So I know our midpoint is 80, but it still seemed to go pretty far away from that. Not a lot though. So I want to get this down. I want to knock it to 70 for now. But I also don't want to forget that we have our max still at 200, and so I want to bring that down. And I don't see this locomotive needing anything more. Let's bring it down to 150 for now. Now, don't forget, by us doing this, and we're shifting the curve, right? So once again, we've got from 0 to 70, and then you got from 70 to 150. So it's not quite half, but it's almost half. So we have a we have a slow speed curve, right? But we've moved the curve down. Linear, I guess is a better way to look at it. It's linear, but it's lower on the chart. So if you're picturing a chart with an X and a Y, distance and time, we were sitting way up high, right, on that axis, and now we've basically brought that line. We haven't changed the line, so we haven't added any bumps to it. It's still linear, but it's down further because this locomotive is not going to be able to reach its max speed that it had when it was basically running free. So, all right, let's take it back to the layout. Let's see where we're at. Okay, so we're going to slap this baby into reverse here, and let's see what we get. We still see that guy take off first. But now you're noticing that they are staying a lot closer together. And if I stop them, they stop almost perfectly together. That's real close. So we are not going to mess with the deceleration at all. That looks perfect. But we still have an issue with acceleration in that this locomotive is still going faster. And you can just see that it's catching up, and so that speed curve is still way too fast there. So, okay, we need to bring that back down. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so maybe this is a more of a do as I say, not as I do video, because we are violating the first rule of speed matching, and I mentioned this in the beginning, and that is I am trying to match a faster locomotive to a slower locomotive. And when you speed match, you've got to do it the other way around. The slower locomotive can always be increased, but the faster locomotive cannot be decreased. It's going to be what it's going to be, and you're just going to have to live with that. So where we're at now is I've gotten these two locomotives as close as I can, and they're not going to go any closer. And where the issue is the difference in the two decoders between the ESU and the Digitrax. The ESU is a much more advanced decoder, and it is directly linked to the sound file. Unfortunately, that's the locomotive that I want to be the lead locomotive, and it's the one that I want to control the train's operation. So because of that, I don't want to change any of the properties in the ESU decoder. Now, the easiest thing to do is to change out the decoder in the Digitrax model with either a ESU loc sound or a loc pilot decoder, and then I'll have all the functionality that I need to make the two run together. But right now that's not in the cards, and that's not in the current budget for things planned, so I have to make do with what I have. And so what we have here now is pretty much that. You're going to notice that the Digitrax decoder is going to start first. But then they match it, they even out, and you notice that they're kind of running in pace. And really, that's what I want. Okay, so even stopping, you're going to notice they're going to kind of stop together. So I've gotten them pretty close. Now, when we throw them in reverse, once again, we have that initial start because the Digitrax is not waiting for a sound file to play, which is controlled by the 124 variable, which Digitrax doesn't support. But you'll notice how close they are running together. So realistically, that is as close to perfect as I'm going to get. And you notice they almost stop together. So it is just that initial start, and there's not much you can do with it. That's an unfortunate difference between two different decoders. So this one's always going to take off first, and depending on what the locomotive is actually doing, you notice there's a huge delay here, and that's because the loc sound is doing a sound deal, and that's going to catch up. But there's not much I can do with it. So what you have to do at this point is you got to understand that these two locomotives are always going to fight. You can either change the decoder or you can consist them in different consists. That's up to you. But for right now, we're going to accept this as speed matched. And I know everybody just went, oh my God, they're not speed matched. I understand that. So let me show you what two speed match locomotives are. We are going decoder to decoder. They are digitracks. Okay, so these are two different manufacturers with both digitracks decoders in it, and as you can see, we do have a difference in speed. It's not significant, but it's enough that they're not running side by side, so therefore you would say, okay, well, they're not speed matched because they're not matching each other's speed. And I would agree with that. I would not put these two locomotives in on a distributed power situation because they're not running together. And you can continue to tweak them and get them closer. Because now my fast locomotive is not fast anymore. My slow locomotive is not slow anymore. So, and what I'm doing is I'm messing with the same variables that we've been talking about the whole time here. So you can see that even among the two decoders that are the same, there are differences in the gearing and the motor itself, and that means the numbers that we put in on one locomotive are not equating to the other locomotive. And this is probably one of the most frustrating things that you're going to have to deal with, because they're not lining up, and even though you've set them the same and you've probably tweaked them left and right a little bit to get them there, they're still not lining up. And unfortunately, the only way to get them closer is to actually keep playing with it, trying to make minor adjustments. And what you got to remember is, every time you make an adjustment, whether you adjust your CVs 3 and 4, or whether you're playing with 2, 5, and 6, they all affect each other and how they operate. And so let me make it worse by adding two more variables into the mix, and that is variable 66 and variable 96. Those CVs control the voltage trim, and what that does is it allows you to fine-tune for those differences in the model. So give it a little bit more power going forward, a little bit less power going reverse, or the opposite of that. And what that tries to do is make it so that your model runs the same forward and backwards due to mechanical issues with just inherent in the manufacturing process. Your locomotives are not going to run the same speed forward and the same speed backward that they do at the same throttle setting. So CV66, which is your forward trim, and CV96, which is your reverse trim, will help adjust those. Now, and I know you're thinking, okay, great, I got another two set of variables to play with. Yeah, but it's worse than that, because as you make adjustments to the speed curve, you're going to find out that you also need to make adjustments to those variables as well. So there's basically 5 variables in play, and I have found particularly bad with these two. The slight adjustments in those variables are equating to some very big differences. So now you're playing with 5 different variables. You're trying to get all those variables to match. And let me just throw this into reverse here. So I'm going to throw it up to about mid-throttle just so you can see it. And in certain points during the curve, the two locomotives appear to be fairly evenly matched. And then there's always this competition. One is always going to try to beat out the other one. So, in that case, reverse seems to be pretty good. And let's bring it in forward here. Another thing that you want to consider is your track needs to be clean, and your locomotives need to be broken in and well oiled. So right now in forward, you can see that our SD40-2, which is a Cato model, was taking off, but now you notice that the distance between them is kind of staying the same. So what that tells me is through the first set of the speed curve, I've got some variables that are making the locomotive act differently. But when it gets to that midpoint, which these two locomotives will probably never ever reach mid-throttle, they seem to be operating a little bit differently. So at mid-throttle, they seem to be fairly well matched, but at the lower speeds, they don't want to play as nice. And so what that tells me is something between CV 2 and 6 is off, and like right now, I can see that the Arnold model here was pulling ahead a little bit, and now they kind of balanced out. Now, don't forget, I am working on a curve, as you can tell. So there's an inside curve. It's got a tighter radius than the outside curve. But so I'm looking at these now, and as I'm running them, I'm trying to determine whether or not they're close enough. And what I'm doing is I'm looking at the effective range that these models are going to operate. So I envision these two models running with the scale trains, and they're going to be on either a coal train or an intermodal train. So in my case, the coal train is going to be running at slower speeds. The intermodal train is going to be running at faster speeds. And just based on where I've got the settings now, this looks like a great candidate for a coal train because it looks like it's doing fairly well at the slower speeds. And so that's mid throttle right there. And you can see that they're running together. So there's some slight variations. Now, what I would recommend doing is I would recommend messing around with the trim settings to try to get them a little bit smoother together. And so what I'm going to do is I can see that it looks like in forward it goes a little bit faster than it does in reverse, at least off the start. So I may knock that 66 voltage down. So right now I don't actually know what I've got that set at. So let's go ahead and take it over to the programming track here. And let's just read that. I know you guys can't see it. You're looking at the layout. But so I'm showing a voltage of 50. So for the trim, both forward and backwards, trim is set on a value from 1 to 255, just like your speed curve. The lower numbers, the less voltage it's adding, higher voltage. I was reading some articles previously that obviously 0 is not doing anything, and apparently at 128 it's not doing anything either. So you've got to be either below or above 128 to see any kind of reaction. So it looks to me like we need to I need to give this guy just a little bit of a kick. And so he's at 50 right now. And just to make a fairly noticeable difference, I'm going to bounce him up to 80 and see what that does for us here. And actually, you know, I want to get it going reverse. Not that I'm testing the reverse, I just want the trains to go further up the track. So you can see here they're running nice in parallel. And then all of a sudden, for some reason, the Arnold has decided that now it wants to speed ahead. I don't understand why it does that because it won't do it all the time. But let's just see what we do here in forward because that's what we were testing. And it looks like we still need a little bit more on that. The other thing that you can do when you have a situation like this, and it's what I'm going to do now, is I'm going to go back in and I'm going to look at my CV2 and see if maybe I need an extra little kick into my CV2. And right now on the SD40, yeah, I don't have any starting. So I'm going to go ahead and give that a little bit more. Let's see if that makes a difference. Now that I've changed CV2, understand that that is going to change where CV66 kicks in. And for those of you who have not gotten into these CVs, I know that this is probably a little bit Greek to you. And I absolutely hate speed matching. You know, this is one of the things in DCC that I think is awesome that you can do. And at the same time, it is such a pain in the ass to do. I hate doing it. But if you're going to run your locomotives together, this is one of the advantages that DCC offers over DC, and that is that you can control this. And so, see, I can still see that I'm getting a better speed out of the other model, so I'm not getting enough kick. Now, don't forget, as you're adding to CV2, you're bringing it closer to CV6, and that means you're changing the way your speed curve is reacting. So, you know, if I'm adding to CV2 and I'm not moving CV6, that means I'm got a very short distance in throttle to get to, and so the locomotive is going to go. It's gonna try to jump to that quicker. It's not gonna go as slow. So I should be getting a better response from the locomotive. Now, don't forget, also, you're affecting how it's operating forwards and backwards. So it looks like for a little bit here, we've actually gotten a better speed match in reverse. So I think with a little bit more trim added to that, we probably have a pretty close match. And let's go ahead and get forward. So it looks like the SD40-2 is staying out ahead. And now the Arnold is not catching up to it. So, okay, great. We got a good speed match there. So I know that I've adjusted my curve. Now, I am seeing that it's not staying together on the reverse. I do not want to mess with that. So this is where your trim comes in. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take it over to the programming track. I'm going to go into CV96 and I'm going to get a read back on that. And so right now 96 is reading 150. So I've already added some power into this thing. So I'm going to kick it up just a tiny bit, go to 180. And see if we can't compensate for the gearing of this locomotive. And so what I've seen in this process is the locomotives typically go faster forward than they do in reverse. And so my trim forward has been less than my trim in reverse. So just remember that. Your locomotives may not be the same. That just happens to be the match on these two. And so I'm seeing that the locomotive is still pulling out ahead. So I need to add a little bit more into this guy. So let's go ahead and do that. Jump it up to 220. Remember that 255 is the max. So I'm almost maxing this thing out. All right. Let's go ahead and move them forward just so we got a little bit of space here to play with. Give them some room to roam. All right. Okay, so I'm calling that good. That's where we're going to stop. You notice they're still not perfect, and you're never going to get them perfect. Even if you've got two models that are the same manufacturer, they're going to run a little bit different just because of imperfections in the manufacturing, gearing, all that sort of stuff. It's going to be a little bit different. So there's two points that I get to when I stop my speed matching. The first point is I get it close enough and I realize with the limitations of the materials that I'm working with, so the decoder type and just the quality of the model, I'm not going to get it any better. And I say, okay, that's close enough. Or two, and this is the funny one, this is the one you guys are probably all going to appreciate, I get tired of dicking around with the settings. And I'm going to tell you, so just in filming this video, actually this is one of the times the filming hasn't really added a whole lot of time to the content, or to the process. It's just this process takes forever. So to get 3 locomotives lined up, I probably have about 2.5 hours in it. And it's just fiddling with the numbers back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And it sucks. It's not fun, because you basically... you get close, and then you get further away, and then you get close again, and you get further away, and it's just not fun to play with. So what I'm looking for now is I want to get all of our locomotives on the track, and don't forget, we're dealing with a sound locomotive here, so it's going to go through its startup sequence. That's the other thing to remember is if you have your startup sequence as part of the locomotive's function and you have non-sound locomotives, there's no way to tell the Digitrax decoder that it needs to wait for that sound startup. So you as the operator have got to do that. You have got to let the locomotive go through its startup sequence. It's got to be ready to rock and roll. And then once it's ready, you can go ahead and put the throttle forward and throttle up. If you don't, your other two locomotives are going to be even further off the mark from starting. And so if you get a short circuit on the layout or something like that that stops your layout, I find it best to bring the throttle all the way down to 0 for this consist, and then let it, go back up to where it was. So we're going to go ahead here, and I've got the throttle set at about 15%, and here are my locomotives trudging off down the track. So what I look for is I want to see how bad the locomotives are fighting, and I look for that in the coupler. And actually, these couplers aren't straining too bad, so I'm going to take you and show you what I mean. Okay, so here is my consist coming around the layout. I'm going to give you an aerial view here so you can see what the couplers are doing, because that's how I tell how good of a speed match I got, which is basically, are they pushing each other? Are they pulling each other? What are they doing? So you can see that we're pushing just a little bit by the way that's coupled in there, and you can see that we're pushing on this as well. So in the order, the locomotive in the front is the slowest, which makes sense. That one's moving a little bit better, and then this guy in the back here, he's still pushing. And so here's what I would do in this case. I would like to see how they do in a train, because I don't think that they're not wildly out of control. The only time that I know that they're definitely out of control would be like right now. Like I know those last two locomotives are trying to, actually I'm not trying to do anything because I don't have the throttle up. But if I turn the throttle up here, you can see how the first one started, and you can hear that the scale change is still kind of going through its sound. So, I mean, they're all providing power, but you can see now that we're pulling and we're pulling. But it doesn't seem like they're necessarily fighting too terribly. So let's go ahead and work this up the speed curve just a tiny bit. And what I want to make sure that we're not doing at this point, realizing that I can't really get a good match, is I want to make sure that we're not jerking the couplers backwards and forwards and that they're staying somewhat smooth in their operation. And they appear to be. So even though we got close, but we don't have a perfect speed match on these, I think we're going to call it done for now. And yeah, I might go back and I might tweak it just a little bit more to kind of get it a little bit closer to perfection, but I don't know that I'm going to spend all that time doing it. The operation seems to be running smooth, and I'm not going to call this a success because, once again, I know that I've got different decoders and I've got different locomotives, and I know that they're doing different things. But so I'm going to wait until I hear that squeal before I change direction, and then I'm going to wait until I hear the reverser change into forward before I go forward. That's just something that you as the operator have to know to do. And then we're just going to take her forward. Okay, once again. Sorry for the jerky camera work here, but I am bouncing backwards and forwards. Okay, so what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to put the CVs that I was working with on the on a screen here at the end. And I'm not necessarily going to tell you what I set these locomotives to, because that information really isn't valuable to you. Because even if you're trying to match the exact 3 locomotives that I matched, it's just not going to, work the same. And so, tips for some easy speed matching here. First, if you have locomotives from the same manufacturer running the same decoder, you're already ahead of the game. Those are going to run as close as possible to starting. Then you want to set your speed curve if you don't have one already set, and that's going to be your 2, 6, and 5 for your start, mid, and high end of your speed curve line. After that, you want to mess with your 3 and 4 variables, which are your acceleration and deceleration rates. And if you recall, CVs 2, 5, and 6 all can be valued between 0 and 255. CVs 3 and 4 can be valued between 0 and 31. And then your next 2 variables that you get to play with are 66 and 96. Those are your forward trim and your reverse trim, and that is just to fine tune the power so that locomotives run the same speed forward and backward. And in that instance, you have a range of 0 to 255, where 0 and 128 really don't affect the curve at all, so they're not going to do anything. So you want to have a value other than 0 or 128 in there. Okay, so that is a wrap. I call this basically the poor man's speed matching. We're not using any kind of sophisticated equipment. We're not measuring the speeds. We're doing it all by eyeball. And I purposely picked 3 different manufacturers running 2 different types of decoders, just to show you the struggle that you have trying to do that, and that you don't need to reach perfection in that case. You just need to get it close. I will tell you that even these 2 locomotives back here, they are speed matched, but they're not necessarily perfect. And any locomotive that you see that I have running on the layout has been speed matched to some degree, just because I don't want there to be a vast difference in how they are operating. So that's my goal. Since I'm not running distributed power right now, my goal is to have them as close as possible to avoid just wear and tear on the locomotives. I know that's a lot of information. That's a long video and a lot of stuff to try to figure out. And I know it's intimidating. And I wish I could tell you that it doesn't totally suck, but it totally sucks. So if you've got any questions, comments, anything that you do different, any secrets that you have found, please, for the betterment of the group, feel free to share with everybody.